So I'm John Kane, and I welcome you to Let's Talk Native on this Tuesday, April 28th, 2020. While this program may not provide a path to spiritual enlightenment, we do encourage and in some cases start conversations. We kind of break the rules here for Native Radio. We don't do prayers or buffalo speeches. We don't do any of the mystic stuff. We take a tough look at history, oppression, and survival. We talk about culture, the arts, politics, and identity. And we may step on a few toes along the way. But our real goal here is to bring people together by breaking down what separates us. We will take on the false narratives and provide critical thinking to all that's heaped upon us. And we do it all right here from the Cattaraugus territory of the Seneca Nation live. So let's talk Native. But first, let me remind people that our audio streams live on our website, which is www.letstalknative.com. We stream live video of the show via Facebook Live on our group pages and share it across a bunch of other pages as well. We take the audio and we put it up on SoundCloud, and then it goes out as a podcast on any of your favorite podcast platforms. We take the video and we put it up on our YouTube channel, which is Let's Talk Native TV. So I encourage you to subscribe to our podcast or subscribe to our YouTube channels, where we provide short form videos as well as the videos of the shows that we do here and the show that I do in New York. So I'm John Kane. I am the show's host and producer, and I'm joined here in studio by Jake Proud, who is managing our audio and our video. Well, let me get into it. I guess we'll start with, I do have a specific topic that I want to talk about in terms of education, but let's run down through some of the numbers. Over the weekend, the world crossed over the 3 million case mark for COVID-19. They crossed over 3 million people. And they also crossed the 200,000 deaths mark for the disease. The U.S. crossed the million case mark, and now they're only a few hundred shy of 60,000 deaths. I say that, and I emphasize 60,000 because that is what Birx and Fauci and the Trump COVID task force had reduced their prediction down from between 100 to 200,000 dead to 60,000. Well, that'll be reached tonight or tomorrow. So that doesn't mean that there aren't any more people going to die. I mean, this is how far off. I mean, like I said, there hasn't really been a multiple day decline in any of the data, any of the numbers that they're using on any of the websites, any of the federal sites, any of the international sites. And the United States is still averaging around 2,000 deaths a day. So yeah, and I also know, okay, well, they upped the 60,000 to 66,000. Well, that's going to take 3 days. Today's death total was actually the fifth highest day since this whole thing began. So it's hard to suggest that the tide has been turned. And of course, now that regulations are loosening in various places, everybody's talking about loosening regulations. There are some people who are violating existing regulations, and that's already starting to show up in some of the states you might not have expected. New York's numbers are still coming down, and they're coming down fairly dramatically. And I gotta say, I'm somewhat cynical. I'm skeptical about some of the numbers that I've seen. When I start seeing New Jersey racking up higher numbers than New York, or close to it. Look, New York is Long Island. It's New York City. It's upstate. It's Western New York. It's there's a lot of people. So I'm somewhat suspect, and of course that suspicion grows with more and more of the mainstream media bringing up some of the things that I've talked about on this show and my New York show about the undercounting of deaths and even cases. It's an interesting thing that's happening now because they started doing these antibody testing. And the antibody testing in places like California and other places, this is stuff they're doing as random tests. They aren't just testing sick people. You can't extrapolate information any good information when you're only testing for the disease people who are trying to get into a hospital. I mean, because those are obviously already sick people. They're already people who are accustomed to going to hospitals and that kind of stuff. But with the antibody test, they've been trying to cross, ethnic and age, sex, zip code, all of those things, so they can grab data that they can extrapolate over a larger population. And in California, they determined that there may be 35 times more people that have been infected, that are infected or have been infected, put it that way, with COVID-19, 35 times. So the immediate thing that people jump to is, oh, well, if there's that many more people infected, let's just change the denominator on the deaths per, over cases equation, and the death rate comes down significantly. Well, the problem with that is you're abandoning the number of confirmed cases by test for this extrapolated number, but you're not abandoning the number of deaths per confirmed cases, and looking at the larger scenario of spikes in deaths compared to previous years. So it isn't just the denominator that's got to change; the numerator's got to change too. If you're going to use something other than just confirmed tests as your input data for determining, rate of spread, the mortality and all that stuff. So there's, again, I get frustrated when I see a bit of a con job being pulled by some of the people. The data, is there, and you can use that data to make real world predictions, I guess. But if you're desperately trying to spin this a certain way, then what you're doing is you're being dishonest or you're being ignorant. Because again, what I saw what was being done with these antibody numbers, I'm thinking you're intentionally, expanding the amount of cases without making any adjustment for the amount of deaths. And then you're saying, oh, look, the mortality rate came down. It's really problematic. I want to remind people that in the United States, it's still less than 2% of the population that have been tested for the disease. And whatever numbers, whatever they're doing with numbers on these antibody tests, which I'm glad they're doing it, and I think it could, if those tests are reliable, it could provide good data. It's becoming more and more clear that the suggestion that if you have antibodies means that you are immune from catching the disease again or contracting the disease again is nobody's been able to nail that down yet. There's a pretty good indication that some people have had multiple infections, and that getting it once doesn't mean you can't get it again. I mean, obviously, the common cold is a coronavirus, and this is the only comparison I'm going to make. You can get the common cold several times a year. So if you get the cold and you get over it, that doesn't mean you're not going to get the cold again. It doesn't mean you're not going to get the cold again in that year. It doesn't mean you're not going to get the cold again next year. So, and this coronavirus has some unique characteristics that frankly the scientists haven't nailed down yet. Other things on the numbers, I gotta say, it appears that the United Kingdom is joining the European Union. No, not in the way that you think. It appears the United Kingdom is joining the European Union in its COVID numbers. The UK has been racking up numbers. They've rushed past a bunch of other countries, including China, and now they passed Germany. They are just below France and only barely below France in the number of cases, and they're barely below France in the number of total deaths. The spread in the UK is significant enough that they may overtake France, Italy, and Spain. I know that seems, almost unbelievable. They certainly are going to overtake France. Right now, the UK sits at 161,000 cases. France is at 165,000 cases. And Italy and Spain are both over 200,000. But I mean, to tell you, when I look at the daily numbers coming out of the UK, they are moving up the list. You know who else is moving up the list? Russia. Russia is going to cross the 100,000 mark probably by tomorrow. So they are starting to show a lot of cases. Of course, their death count is unbelievably low, and I don't mean that in a good way. I mean it's, for almost 100,000, for 93,000 cases, they're claiming that they only had 867 deaths. That is an unheard of number. That is so low compared to anybody else with those kind of numbers that to say it's unbelievable means don't believe it. Put it that way. So anyway, these are some of the things that this is kind of where things are at. Look, I did hear a video report done by Ricky Armstrong, president of Seneca Nation, acknowledging that the Seneca Nation did lose one of its people down in Allegheny, and without naming names and that kind of thing. And so it is the first loss of life that the Seneca Nation has suffered from COVID-19. They're still suggesting that there's almost no spread. And there are testing. I don't know that there's a lot of testing going on. We'll see how this plays out with time. But thus far, there's only been 3 confirmed cases in the Seneca Nation, and of those 3, one person had it pretty badly and didn't make it. So my heart goes out to anybody who gets sick in general, but certainly anybody who loses a family member or who's facing such the worst part of this disease. Again, my thoughts go with those people. It's interesting. I mentioned it a couple of days ago. The other thing that Ricky Armstrong addressed in his video announcement was that he confirmed no, the Seneca Nation is not buying a lacrosse team. It's not buying the Buffalo Bandits or the Rochester Nighthawks. They're not. So because that was a rumor that was being spread by somebody who I hate to even dignify, but it was interesting that Ricky Armstrong decided that while doing this public announcement, he felt like it was important enough to dash that rumor that was being spread. Hey, I do want to mention that on Thursday, I've got Robert Hanley joining me. He is a writer for Salon and for a small newspaper called The Chief Leader in New York. He is somebody that I've known for a number of years. He's a real good investigative journalist. He's done radio on WBI, the other Pacifica stations, WNYC, and a number of other stations. Bob and I have not been talking on a regular basis, but he follows my work and I follow his. So we've been kind of queuing off of each other on some of the things that we've raised about, like I said, undercounting of the deaths associated with this stuff. And Bob, because he is an investigative journalist, does have the ability to use his contacts to find out what are morticians saying, what are EMTs saying. Bob's going to join me on my Thursday show, my Let's Talk show with Regan DeLoggins and myself on Thursday. That's at 4 o'clock. It's only 1 hour show. We're going through some fundraising stuff at WBI, so it won't be a 2 hour show, but it'll be a 1 hour show. May not even get to callers because I think Robert Hanley and Regan and I will have plenty to talk about. So, but if you want to hear from an investigative journalist, a guy who has a lot of the context within unions and within the political figures in New Jersey and in New York, you'll want to hear this show. So that's Bob Henley, who will be joining Regan and I on Let's Talk. That's Thursday at 4 o'clock. We will be streaming it live here on via Facebook, and of course, it'll also stream live on WBAI. Well, it'll be on the air on 99.5 on the FM dial in New York City, and also on via the WBAI website, which is www.wbai.org. You can go there and you can listen to us live there. And of course, it'll go up as a podcast. It'll go up as a YouTube video. So if you can't catch it live, I'll be promoting it. I'm anticipating a very, very good show with Bob Henley. So I just want to put that out there before I forget. All right. So I wanted to talk about education. I mean, grade schools, elementary schools, high schools, colleges, they're all wrestling with distance learning, with online courses because of COVID-19. So, like I said, universities been doing some of this stuff for quite some time, but certainly high schools and grade schools haven't. And the fact that that's happening, it is one of the good things that comes out of a crisis is what you learn. Some of the things that you learn to do, like working from home and that kind of stuff. You realize that this can be done, and there may be efficiencies involved in doing things this way. And I think that's one of the things that is coming from the education side. Now, I'm not saying that online schooling is the best answer for trying to educate kids or young adults. I'm not saying it's the best, but here's my thing. We know that the education system has pretty much failed most Native communities, and part of it is the fact that we don't learn about Native stuff. We're not just, and I don't mean culture and language. I mean, some of that stuff does get incorporated into curricula, but we don't learn about the things that we need to learn at the lower levels, like grade school, high school, and college, that can advance our careers on our territory. We almost gauge success for a Native person on somebody who graduates and leaves the territory. Leaves and they go off and they have a successful career based on their education and their core study, and I understand that, and so I'm not saying that education has failed individuals. What I'm saying is that public education, private education, I mean the U.S. educational system has not done well for Native communities. So, and again, give me a moment here to explain. We are not teaching our own people in our own schools, and we're not learning in the other schools. How do we improve our communities? It's just not a topic. It's not even part of the consideration about education. I mean, we hear even high schools, but certainly we hear colleges saying we are preparing young people for the global economy. Well, I don't give a rat's ass about the global economy. And frankly, I don't really care that much about the U.S. economy. I care about our economy. I care about the commerce that exists on our territory. And commerce that can be, we just take what we can in terms of commerce and economic development. I mean, tobacco and gas, we do that because we were able to defend not submitting to New York State tax. So those are two very highly taxed commodities, tobacco and gasoline. So those aren't the perhaps the choices that we'd make on what we would want our economy to be based upon. Gaming, that's not necessarily the choice that we would like to make. That's not the most culturally sensitive. And certainly for all of those Native territories that have themselves gotten involved in extractive industries, even as many territories are fighting the extractive industries. Tourism in general, I'm not a hater on it. As long as we're not, exploiting our culture in a bad way. I don't mind being involved in the tourism business. I don't even really mind being involved in gaming. But what I'm saying is we aren't looking at what we can do with our existing territories, with our relationships to other Native territories, with our young people. What can we develop for the future? And I mean, let me run this one by. I mean, most Native governments, often called tribal governments, are so I don't know. They're so managed by state and federal guidelines in everything they do, including their economic development. Not just gaming, but even gaming. Look at gaming. Put the states right in those Native businesses. So not only do we have the non-Native governments that have a huge and dominant effect on what happens on our territories, but who do we hire? We hire white people, and I don't mean just white people. I mean, I don't have a problem with it. But the highest paid people on most Native territories are the managers of the gaming facilities, non-Native. The highest paid are the lawyers and the lobbyists and the consultants, the advisors, all non-Native. And look, I've done a couple of shows where I talked about some of the work that non-native consultants have done for the Seneca Nation. And you can see the gaping holes in cultural understanding when a guy who claims to be one of the best in the business produces an economic assessment of the Seneca Nation, what it means to the region, and all, an economic impact study, as he called it. I mean, some of the stuff was just so wrong, and it's not his fault. I guess it's his fault if he's selling himself to Native people to not know Native people, but he's not Native. See, we don't look at fostering and developing our own skill sets within. Nobody tells a kid that they could have these professional jobs where they're working for their own nation. I mean, look, we encourage people to go become doctors and lawyers, but I'll tell you, it isn't even that often that the lawyers find much security in working for Robert Porter was a lawyer, and he was a one-term president and couldn't even run for treasurer after that. I mean, so if you and part of it was because the way he was educated was not geared towards really serving the Seneca Nation, in my opinion. So when I look at the needs that we have for public relations, there's something I know a little bit about. Public relations, writing, again, economic impact studies, business development, and especially business development where sovereignty or our regulatory advantages, you can't hire people out there. They don't know. They don't even know how to factor in what are the economic incentives to our tax advantages. And we don't teach them. Most of the people who are in business in the Seneca Nation, private business, are first-generation business people. I would say that a lot of them built their businesses because they saw somebody else did it. They didn't know. And I would argue today there are many people in business on Native territories, especially Haudenosaunee territories where we've taken such advantage of tax issues. They don't even know what our real defense is on taxation. They just know that we get away with it. And that's problematic. I mean, if we don't know how to defend it, if we don't know what the rationale is, what the strategy is, somebody developed a strategy, obviously, and that's how these businesses not only became profitable, but they became somewhat sustainable. But we don't teach this stuff. We don't teach about the history. We don't teach about. Look, our kids go in their kindergarten. The first thing they're taught to do is just pledge allegiance to the flag. Then they're told they don't have to. You don't have to, but we're going to look at you funny if you don't. And they learn the Star Spangled Banner, and they learn about George Washington and Thomas Jefferson and Abraham Lincoln. But they don't learn the stuff that they did against Native people. They don't learn about the Sullivan Campaign. They don't learn about Thomas Jefferson screwing the Native people and buying the Louisiana Purchase so they could move everybody west of the Mississippi. They don't talk about Abraham Lincoln being the largest executioner in the history of the United States, signing the execution order for the 38th Dakota to be hanged the day after Christmas. No, they don't teach that stuff. No, our kids go to these schools, and I don't mean just grade school and high school. College is the same thing. Look, you can hear people say on a continuous basis, well, we're American citizens too. We don't even teach that we have a choice in that. That, we can be American citizens. The United States can't deny us citizenship. But we don't think about, but do we have to claim that? Do we have to accept the imposition of U.S. citizens? We don't teach that stuff. We don't teach about international law. We don't teach about how it is that we should have our own passports, why we should have our own travel documents. We don't teach anything about the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. They don't teach about that stuff in school or in college, or what is the way to use that. We don't teach about Native diplomacy. We don't teach about the treachery that was involved in not only treaty making but treaty breaking. We don't teach about how U.S. law is used in violation of their own constitutional limits when applied to Native people. We don't teach any of that stuff. We don't teach how to be diplomats, how to be speakers, how to be writers, how to be, we don't teach hardly any of this stuff to our young people. So I'm saying, if not now, when? Why can't we organize? Look, we're going to get through this COVID-19 thing, and not without some serious damage. I mean, I can't imagine what the economic impact has been on the Seneca Nation, for instance. But look, eventually the things will open back up and money will start flowing, and we'll have those battles over things like revenue sharing with the state. We'll have our battles with the federal government and the state governments over what role they play in our businesses. But we're going to rely on white people to fight those battles for us. But when we do get those things up and running, is it time now for us to create a network of native territories, especially the more affluent ones? And regardless of whether their affluence comes from some sources that others aren't comfortable, but should we begin putting together an online course of study? And I don't mean just a bachelor program or a PhD program or a postgraduate program. I'm saying course studies that we teach what we need on our territories. Sustainable economies. We educate our kids about things like governance, conflict resolution, diplomacy, all of these things that could change forever the way that we govern. I mean, let's teach what the Guyana de Goa was in school. I mean, whatever that school looks like or means. But let's teach it in a way that even if we aren't going to be a Guyana de Goa, operate under strict, a strict interpretation of the Guyana de Goa, that we at least pull some things out of that. Say, you know what? Elected government doesn't accomplish what we need to accomplish. There are some things that we need to do that were addressed in the Guyana de Goa. Things like conflict resolution and restorative justice, these kinds of things. So if we do some of that stuff, and we use this rethinking of how we educate, we actually educate for our future. And I don't mean just the short-term future. I mean we begin an educational process with a strategy, that may be somewhat different for every native territory. But we provide some foundation for some of that stuff to happen. All right, hey, we're at the bottom of the hour, so we'll take a break when we come back. But I'm not done yet here. I got more to go on this subject. I think education is something that we should be rethinking now, not just because of COVID-19 or in spite of COVID-19, but because there is an opportunity, because so many are rethinking the delivery of education. I'm saying let's rethink delivery, but let's rethink content. All right, we'll take a break. We'll be right back. All right, thanks for coming back. Let me thank my sponsors for Let's Talk Native and for Let's Talk in New York. I want to thank Ross and Holly John and the RJE family of businesses for not only the support that they give, but they actually provide us the space. Our footprint here is among one of RJE's facilities. So the Let's Talk Native studios are housed here, and I got to give a lot of props back to Ross and Holly for their support of what we do here. I also want to thank Grand River Enterprises and Native Wholesale Supply for support. Look, these are the two entities that really, and look, with the GRE, some of that goes back to Sugar Montour. And that's part of the reason I have that support is from my good friend Sugar Montour, who's no longer with me, but who made a commitment that Grand River Enterprises is fulfilling in Sugar's support for what we do here. But these are the entities that allow us to keep doing what we're doing. And Jake and I are working on some plans for not only more videos in the future, but even improving what we're doing in terms of delivering this show and expanding some capabilities. So we're always trying to, improve what we're doing. So we can't do that without the support from a couple of sponsors and the ones who, sometimes are there when we need them, including some individuals. I've got some friends and listeners who make contributions from time to time. And again, it's greatly appreciated. And of course, I also appreciate all of you who listen to the show, share the show, offer your comments. The reason we have these conversations is so they'll continue. I'm not just trying to create a little echo chamber here. I'm hoping that some of the ideas, and I've seen some of this, I've seen the effects of bringing up certain subjects that once they drift off, somebody else grabs a hold of it. That's why I was talking about with Bob Hanley and some of the mainstream media, grabbing some of the things we've talked about on this show that turn around and get covered by, bigger and more well-funded, members of the media. But even some of the things that we've done here, look, we've had impact on various things, from taxation to, issues with the state, the floor tax with the federal government. I know that we have had impact on the conversations. I'm not saying that I'm certainly not a tail wagging the dog when it comes to Seneca Nation, but I know some of the conversations that we have had here on the gaming stuff has impacted policy, both from and strategy from the Seneca Nation and from the state. So look, we start a conversation, and our hope is that the conversations continue, and you guys help us do that. So I want to thank you guys for sharing the show. Encourage you to share the podcast and the YouTube videos as well. This is the way that we try to, whether we're creating earworms or whatever you want to call it, where we start a buzz that hopefully other people take. Look, and if you're sharing a show, or if you're sharing a specific quote, then yeah, I'd like to be, attributed to those quotes. But you know what? If you take a conversation from here and create your own, I have no problem with that. And by all means, I just encourage people to have the conversations that need to be had. And that's what we're doing here. So today, what are we talking about here? Well, I'm realizing what education has gone through with these shutdowns, with kids being at home, with college students not going to campus. So what I'm wondering, look, and there's a few native universities. Haskell comes to mind. But what if we created, through collaboration and with other native territories, a well-funded institutions of higher learning that could lay some foundation on how we defend certain regulatory advantages, how we take our territories into a different direction in terms of, governance and economic development, how we utilize, many of the articles of the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People, and really reach out to the world to say, look, we are asserting that we have rights and responsibilities to our people, and that we never, I hear a lot of these acknowledgments that are happening. I was listening to Fiona Apple's new album, where they do an acknowledgement on the land acknowledgement. It's great to say where you're from, but how do you acknowledge more than that? How do you acknowledge who we are as a people, not just the lands that we almost exclusively occupied? So I want to do more, attribution to not only the thousands of years that bring us to where we are today, but how we take some of that stuff from the past and we take it into the future. We need sustainability, and by sustainability, I'm not talking about a war chest. I mean, we need economies that are sustainable, that are not just judged by a profit and loss statement. That quality of life becomes the emphasis of even our education. We want a higher quality of life. That doesn't necessarily mean more money. It can mean that, but even if it is more money, it's got to be sustainable. One of the key things is being able to feed ourselves. I'll never understand. We were known as a people who created large food stores. We had enough of our staple diet, the corn and bean and seeds, the squash pumpkin seeds and these kinds of things, the three sisters we call. But we had enough stores of food that if somebody within our region had a bad, had a drought or had a flood and lost crops, we had enough. We had a food bank. We literally had food banks. In fact, it's what the French and George Washington with the Sullivan campaign targeted our food banks to destroy our food because they knew we had it. But we live in a time now that our food bank doesn't just have. I mean, it certainly could and should be the dried goods that were a part of our staple diet. But we can also can goods. We can buy canned goods, but we can also can some things, and we can have warehouses full of enough food that if anything disaster should happen, like COVID-19, if people don't, look, the biggest problem with not being able to go out and work is to make sure that you can feed your families. That's sustainability. But I'm not just saying we live our lives in anticipation of crisis, but we do. Look, we are the people who gave life to the concept of 7 generations, making decisions today that will, for one, leave no negative impact 7 generations from now, but quite to the contrary, will have positive impact. So we plan for the future. I'm not saying we don't live for the moment. Sure we do. Sure we do. But we plan for the future. And we try to make sure that we do nothing detrimental to the future generations, including the generations that we'll never see. This is the concept of 7 generations. But we don't teach that in school. We don't teach what it would mean practically to apply a longer vision, a long game. Look, when you go to business school, you're teaching people how to, it's all about short game. I mean, that's what it is. I mean, look, the business models are you develop a product or service that that has appeal across global reaches, right? And you market that and you create a profit and loss, and then once you manage to have show profitability, you do a initial public offering and you sell a portion of that and you raise more money with that, so you sell a small portion, a minority share of your business, and then you grow the business out, and then you maybe sell another minority share, and then you sell it, so you get 2 or 3 bites of the apple of this great idea that you developed. And that's what they teach you in business school. How to enter the global market and the marketing of your idea and selling it right now. Look, every time I listen to one of these shows on NPR about, how they made it, I don't know, there's a show, I can't think of the name of it, but it's, but it talks about how these companies, almost every one of them ultimately sell the thing out. They sell it to Microsoft. They sell it to, to Gates, or, they sell it to, some big, multinational. Yeah, How I Built This. Yeah, that's what it is. I mean, every time, so I watch it, and almost every one of them sell it out. In the old days of America, you used to see companies that would put their family name on the company, and then they would put, and I know it's gender biased, they put, and sons. It would always be such and sons, not daughters. And and I'm not advocating the gender bias, but the point was that they would build a company that would be generationally kept in the family. That's not the plan anymore. The plan is to build something that can have brand appeal, so you can build that brand up and then sell it. That's not. I don't want to teach that to our kids. I mean, look, we can make our kids aware of what that is, and they have to be aware of it, because those are going to be the sharks that are at our door, the wolves that are at our door. Sharks don't come to the door. Wolves come to the door, unless you live in a houseboat. But but no, I mean, we need to teach our kids how to build something that isn't just going to cater to a passing trend. That, or if it is going to cater to a passing trend, you build it for that with the idea that it's a stepping stone, that it is the path to something else. It's the lost leader, if you will. It's it's the means to justify an end, so to speak. And I don't have a problem with that. Look, I don't begrudge tobacco sales and gas sales or gaming, but I would like to think that we have more to offer our own people, more than gas, gaming, and cigarettes. And I'm not a big fan of cigarette smoking, so but I understand that it's an important part of the economy. And look, the people who sponsor the show are involved in tobacco, so I'm not begrudging it. But those, even those people are diversifying. They're trying something else. Everybody's trying to do something else. They know what brought them to a dance. But when do the governments, the native governments, understand that programmatically they have got to take a bigger role in planning for the future, not just trying to expand the bottom line to pay for programs? I mean, and there's no sense in paying for programs if the programs themselves are not geared towards sustainability. So this is my ask. This is the conversation that I want to have about expanding the notion of education, that we don't just try to get law degrees and medical degrees and the PhD. Look, I would love to be a philosopher, but I would love to see a philosopher whose real basis their foundation is from native philosophy. And look, and I see people market that stuff. Look, I watched Last Dance with the Chicago Bulls, right? They talk about Phil Jackson and how much he grabbed in native spirituality and ideology into his moments of Zen and all. Look, but the hell with the white guys doing it. I'm saying, what are we doing? What do we take from our culture, from our language? I'm not a spiritual person, so I'm not going to get into the whole notion of spirituality. But what do we take from 10,000 years of development as a people that brings us to the place now, in spite of what's happened over the last 500? But we still exist. Not all of our people survived that. Not all of our people have survived colonization, but we as a people have. So how do we take what our ancestors provided to us and carry it into the future? Because I'm seeing less and less of it, folks. I'm seeing less and less of anything that helps define us as Native people. Because casinos don't. I mean, it provides much needed revenue. Granted, it does. Until it doesn't. See, I'm saying we need to create some things that insulate us from the economic crises that the United States are definitely going to see. I mean, look, some people are calling this the fall of the empire. And it may be the start of it. I mean, if there's one thing that COVID-19 has demonstrated is the failure of not just U.S. capitalism, but global capitalism. So we're seeing, and we haven't felt the impact of what has happened to the economy in the United States. We're not feeling it yet. You think you're feeling it. No, you're feeling cabin fever right now. You're not feeling the economic fallout of the government just printing more money or throwing more money electronically into your account. And what that all is going to mean. You don't understand what collapse could really look like. This is an economic collapse. Not yet. But what could we do? I mean, in the short term, it's going to be hard to prepare for major calamity. But I'm just saying, at what point do we start to lay the foundation for the long term? What point do we start being those people who think 7 generations? Because we aren't. And like I said, with every passing year, the growing dependency, and I don't mean dependency on state and federal government, but I'm saying dependency on the system that they've created, the capitalist system. We're all in it. We're all in it. So how can we begin to reduce? Look, one of the first things that people think of, and I'm glad there is a program at the Seneca Nation, and I'm glad individuals do this in spite of, or with or without, or in spite of Seneca Nation program, agriculture, growing food. But we're not doing it at a scale that can really save us. So when I talk about food banks, it honestly would not take much. I mean, even as individuals to store enough food to feed yourself for 6 months. I mean, look, metal cans. I'm not suggesting that's the best way to eat, but if you had to, I mean, we have freezers. We've got pantries. You can fill those things up. I mean, it wasn't until this stuff started happening that I started buying enough food that would last me. I mean, look, I used to just buy when I'm hungry. I'm going to go buy something and eat it. But if you start planning ahead, now you start planning ahead with gardens. You start planning ahead with storing food for the future. And you store it in a way that you don't have to, the expiration dates don't matter. That's what I'm talking about here. That is a way to plan for the future. And when I talk about economies, I'm not just talking about economies that are cash-based or monetary-based. I'm not just talking about bartering, but is there a different way? Can we reduce our cost of living in terms of cost in dollars and cents? Can we live a higher quality of life for less dollars? I've talked about this before. I mean, I've talked about the idea that one of the things that unions did for the United States was demand a high enough wage for workers rather than management and ownership, that they could live off of working 40 hours a week. I'm sorry, but that doesn't exist anymore. You cannot have a single earner working 40 hours a week, at least not for the average family, and support that family on 40 hours a week. You've got to have mom, pop, and two or three of the kids out there working to cover their own needs. And you're not working 40 hours a week. You're probably working 50, 60, 70 hours a week. So today, people are living worse lives than they were 30, 40 years ago. When I was a kid growing up, my dad worked. He was a high steel worker. He earned enough money that we could live decent lives without my mother having to go out and work. That doesn't exist anymore. So that's how much the economy is degraded. I mean, in my lifetime. Now, many of you who are much younger than me may not even put these things into its proper perspective. Honestly, we shouldn't be working 70 hours a week. Two incomes working 60, 70 hours a week to support a family. We should be, you would think, in the evolution of man and efficiency and civilization, as they claim, why aren't we working 20 hours a week and spending more quality time with our homes, with our families, with our community? That doesn't exist in the American model, but it could exist in ours. But we have to make that choice. Can we envision our world where our need for currency, cash, money, is diminished enough that we provide products and services to each other that in a different kind of ecosystem, I guess, that doesn't require us to have $1,000 a week coming in or $500 a week coming in? Can we even imagine that? Well, if we can't imagine it, we can't teach it. So what I'm suggesting here, because there is a pivotal point in time, because of this pandemic, it's making people rethink about the delivery of services. But we're not rethinking the content of those services, especially when it comes to education. So this is what I'm throwing out there. And I'm not suggesting I have the answers, but at least this should be a conversation. And it's a conversation that we should begin. Look, there's been talk about doing our own schools. We're talking about doing homeschools. I'm not necessarily a big fan of homeschools that don't allow our kids to interact and have the social interaction, including the sports and the theater and the arts and the music and all of those creative things. So I think we need that. But what I was thinking about in terms of the distance learning and the notion of creating online, content and delivery of online content, I'm thinking about taking it to the next level. When we want to learn, look, and I'm not just talking about a degree here. I mean, maybe you get certified in installing solar panels, for crying out loud. Whatever it is. I mean, how do we create, microgrids within our territories? We're not teaching. We don't teach that stuff. So not just the stuff that people think about in terms of academia, but in terms of vocational stuff. Rethinking what a home is, what a community is, how we get power, how we, how independent are we in the pursuit of our lives. There are any number of things that I could see there being course study involved in. And I'm not pulling away from mathematics or science. I was asked the question, do we have scientists? We do. I mean, I know, one of the kids that went to, she's a girl now, one of the women who went to school when my daughter did, she went down into Texas, and she was involved with some of these nanocarbon. She was working in a lab, so yeah, we have scientists, but we don't have scientists working on the science that we need back home. And I'm not suggesting that that science for nanocarbon particles doesn't eventually make it to issues that affect us, but computer sciences. I mean, medical sciences. Look, I'm not saying that we're going to develop the next vaccine, but at least if we could do the research, if we had researchers who could, wrap their head around some of the information that is associated with some of our underlying conditions, so we can come up with preventative strategies. By all means, study to become a doctor, but you know what? Maybe we need to rethink some of and I don't want to just say holistic, because that has a sense, that has a hocus pocus sense to it for many people. But we need to think about the alternatives to what the textbook treatment is for because you know what, some of that textbook treatment is wrong, and it's also wrong for who we are. The way Native people process insulin is different than the way non-Native people do. And part of it has to do with evolutionary development and the fact that, our evolution was tied to a different kind of diet and a different region. Look, I realize that we've been intermingling with with Europeans and people from all over the continent for half a millennia, but that doesn't mean that our bodies, after thousands and thousands of years of doing certain things a certain way, have fully adjusted to that. I mean, that's why Native people. The idea of consuming sugar the way sugar is consumed, that's not 1,000 years of that. That's not 500 years of that. That's 50 years of gross amounts of sugar consumption. The fact that Native people are lactose intolerant, maybe the idea of drinking cow's milk doesn't make sense. Maybe cows shouldn't be raised to create this entire infrastructure of dairy commerce. I like cheese. I'm not a big fan of milk, but I like cheese. I know, shredded cheese on top of my Indian taco with fry bread. No, yeah, but I like cheese. But maybe we don't need. Maybe the United States shouldn't be filled with dairy farms. Maybe instead of growing corn to feed cows to produce milk, maybe our farmers should be growing stuff that we eat directly. I mean, this gets into the whole idea of what is the size of the carbon footprint to create the nutritional needs that we have. Even on the protein side, chicken, fish, beef, pork. How can we get the protein? We can get more protein out of vegetables than we can out of meats. even a part of our natural, our traditional diet, beans. So, again, there has to be a rethinking of all this stuff. I mean, even when we hire nutritionalists, are we doing a proper evaluation of what our diets traditionally would have been? So when we offer nutrition advice on a native territory, do we consider the culture when we do it? Or are we just taking, the food triangle that somebody gave us, the food groups? Because they do vary depending on your DNA. So this is what I'm saying. There are entire areas of study that could be specifically geared towards our needs. Look, even when we do, I saw the Seneca Nation did one of those needs assessment things, and you could tell it was textbook out of some advisor or consultant, said, well, this is how we do a needs assessment. We even have to have a white person tell us how to determine what our needs are. I mean, that's what I'm talking about here. And maybe we do today. Maybe we do need a white person to run the casino. Maybe we do need a white person to be our legal counsel. I'm not saying we do. I'm saying maybe we do today. But do we need that tomorrow? Can't we develop some of the skill sets that even the cottage industries that should support our community, our governments, again, our needs assessment? Look, all the talk about cannabis, I would like to learn more about what we do with hemp products and the cottage industries that come from those kinds of things. That would be, maybe it's not part of our culture, unless you're Tuscarora, because Tuscarora, that's what they're named for separating the hemp. That's what a Tuscaroras means, right? Look, that's all I'm suggesting. We need to rethink. We need to rethink what we do in terms of education. And if not now, when? Look, I'm just about out of time. So some shows I'm trying to figure out how I stretch it out for the last 5 minutes. Now I'm trying to figure out how to shut up. So I'm just going to do it. I want to thank you guys for listening. And, catch us on Thursday for Let's Talk. I got Bob Hanley and Regan DeLoggins. And then we'll see you back here on Saturday. Yahweh.